Hello, and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. You may notice my voice is a little mourning, and as well as my background is slightly different. So I'm calling in live from the Microsoft Build Conference out here in Seattle. So we have an opportunity to speak the conference. I'm going to be a Microsoft expert, ask the experts apparently for things around Fabric. So we'll see how long that mileage runs. It may be good. It may be good. They may stump me a lot. I don't know. There's a couple other MVPs from the data platform space here as well. And if nothing else, we'll at least be pointing fingers at each other, trying to get everyone to answer other people's questions. So we'll see what happens. Should be fun.
Well, that should be a fun Thursday episode to hear about all the questions, Mike. But happy early Tuesday to you then.
Oh, yeah.
It is early for us.
And I'm not going to lie, with your background, this reminds me of our early episodes because I used to do it from an office too with trying to blur the background. This brings back a little. This is a little reminiscent. So I love to hear.
The hotel room doesn't really come with colored lights or backgrounds, or I can't really. I didn't think about it till like midnight. I was like, you know what? I probably should have thought about like some kind of lights I could have put around the room so it wasn't quite just so stark and white. I don't know. Anyways, it is what it is.
Walk in there and say, "Hey, I'm a podcaster. So what rooms do you have available?"
Well, that would be, I think, honestly. To be frankly honest, right? I was thinking I would like to do this from the actual event. However, we are 2 hours earlier, so nothing's open. Like literally, the building's entirely shut down. So even if I wanted to go, even just sit in front of a sign out front, or something that was build related, to be like, "Hey, we're here," and sitting in the couch and talking to people about things, you couldn't even do it. It wouldn't even work because there's nothing open at this point. So
we should run with this idea, Mike. Right?
I like it.
Like from now on, right? You need to bring the big mic, or show like, hey, you're an influencer, Mike. So like as part of that, being that big influencer, you could call these hotels and be like, hey, what do you guys want to work with me here? Do you have a room that would be fantastic in the background as I'm talking for a full hour to my
put a little sign up there
listeners
for whatever the hotel name is. Yes.
Yeah, right. Put that in the background. I think if you gave me the suite, right, that would be great, right behind like the double big couch and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I like that. Okay, for next conference, I'll have to think about that one. We'll have to increase
by Expedia.
Exactly.
There you go.
Tommy, it looks like you're in Maui. It looks like
yeah, right.
Seth, you're in Bora Bora? Oh, interesting. How much are you guys really making on the podcast?
That's funny.
Excellent. Anyways, we're excited for the event. It should be really interesting. I did get a chance to get there early, so I already have like my Microsoft Build shirt that they've given you, and they're doing this really interesting thing now. They're actually creating the shirts on demand at conferences now. So they have like a screen printer that's like a mobile setup, and so you basically pick the kind of shirt you want. They take your shirt over to a screen printer, they screen it, and then they immediately go to a heat press. I don't really know how it works, but then they steam the shirt or something. They heat it, and then it sets the ink apparently, and then you're like, "Here's your shirt." I was like, that's a really eco-friendly way of doing like shirt building, because then you're not making hundreds of shirts that people may or may not use. And you can just take the gray shirt to the next event and just print the next logo and do the next things. Like that's a really smart way of doing it.
Yeah, the only problem is some people become regional directors.
Hey, we're not going to talk about that. So a slight story. Well, since Tommy picked it up, I'll have to put down the story now. So we went to the Microsoft MVP Summit, and they had the same kind of experience. Pick out a shirt. It had like Microsoft MVPs, and they had this little tiny icon on the right-hand shoulder for regional directors, which is another level. I guess it would be like, I don't know if it's level up. It's just a different person in the Microsoft MVP program. And I was like, I'll see if I can get one of those shirts. So I have a little regional director shirt, even though I'm not a regional director. I was like, well, I guess I'll let anyone be a regional director these days. So,
and this is his lawn mowing shirt. So don't worry.
Yeah. No one knows I have it except all three of you now who are on the podcast. So, anyways, it was a super fun event, really, really neat event. And again, it was a really interesting experience. It was very fast. Did it very quickly. very well done. So superb experience. So, but anyways, the venue is amazing. I've never been to Build before. It's the first time I've been. It's a brand new conference center. They have a Seattle conference center, and this is the new version of their building. So you're going to see media content from this new Seattle conference center, which is gorgeous. Very well done. A lot of glass, very modern, huge ceilings and stuff. So it's definitely very impressive looking. So look forward to seeing a lot of content coming out from that as well. Super exciting to see that as well. And then I'm excited for the announcements. There's going to be a lot of big announcements. We're going to be able to see main stage and watch Satya come out and present some things and see some big content coming from there. So I'm excited to see what kind of event pieces we're going to have. What are the major new pieces of software for Fabric or other parts across Azure and other things? This is a very developer-centric conference, so it should be pretty technical in nature. So let's see what announcements are being made.
Yeah, and on behalf of Seth and I don't know if Seth believes in this, but I'm sure he does. We're pumped for you for being there. You're our correspondent, but to be there, to be able to do the helping out, but also kind of I'm basically you can do everything. I'm an Explicit Measures podcast speaking from live events.
Yeah, we did it, boys. We've made it to the
top. I want some live shorts going, Mike.
Oh yeah.
Corresponding thing. Like, this is a good idea that Tommy's having in real time. This is Mike from the Explicit Measures podcast. Hey, with me today, right? Like,
have you heard of him?
Here's Satya. He's
he's one of
our best favorite fan.
Exactly. So. Well, actually, great idea. I'll see if I can capture some kind of fun moments and throw some shorts on YouTube and some other event things from the event specifically. So I'm going to experiment with it a bit. Bear with me while I try and figure out my filming skills. I don't have a film director. It's like literally me by myself. So if the camera's a bit shaky, it just may have to be that way because my arm only goes so far out to be able to capture that view or that shot. So anyways, it should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. So, Tommy, let's jump in for our topic today. I think we've got a topic kind of just general talking about some. This might probably be more on the softer side of the skills, not technical, more people and process potentially here. And we're going to probably jump in with a topic around building a BI team. So, give us some kind of intro points here, Tommy, and we'll take it and run.
Yeah, I think this comes from previous episodes too, where we've already talked about what are the roles in Fabric now. How are we shifting with roles? And I think the next logical question is, okay, what does that actually make up the team? We've talked about the individual career. We talked about what an organization is looking for, but then what does the team look like? And how do we actually build up a BI team, both from the, like you said, from the skill point of view, but from the different perspectives point of view? What makes a BI team successful? What helps it grow? What helps it have an impact on an organization or a department?
Yeah, this is going to be interesting because I think this is going to mean a lot of different things for a lot of different companies.
Especially ever evolving.
Yeah, I've been having lots of discussions around what does it look like with Fabric now? I mean, so we've had Power BI for this whole time, and we had the Fabric conference, which was very focused on Fabric things, but yet Power BI is still a part of Fabric. So it really does feel like not that Power BI is being pushed by the wayside, but a lot of things in Fabric are starting to impact and influence like how we think about doing business intelligence. And how does that impact going to work on the central BI team? Because traditionally, a lot of these roles, data science and data engineering, that would maybe be handled more on the IT side. And so now we're bringing more of those roles closer to where we actually have reports and models. So we'll kind of talk through that as well.
Yeah, can I
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I want to really touch on the point that Mike just said, because I think that's really permanent to the Fabric and Power BI. Just because we have Fabric now doesn't mean we have less Power BI or less need for Power BI. Yes. If Fabric wasn't a thing right now, we still would have this conversation on what a BI team is. We would still have the whole intricacies of MSS and adoption and all the things that go through it. Just because we have Fabric doesn't mean that we're pushing less Power BI. If anything, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of where I was going to lean into, right? Like, I think the Power BI story of individuals that know how to, connect to sources of data, transform it, and create something out of it in a model and visualization is the same things that you can do on an enterprise level. Fabric just brings those enterprise tools closer to those people. So we've talked about that a little bit in that roles and shifts fabric, where or like our episode like 318 or something, where I kind of am leaning towards a slightly different direction, where the fantastic thing about fabric is all of these tools and technologies are much closer together now. But in terms of the Power BI super user, right, and somebody learning fabric, it's the concepts are the same, the tools are different, and how you go about structuring things has a little bit more rigor behind it, right, as well as technical know-how. You learn some languages, you got to understand how the flow of these things work and operate through the different areas. But that different area is now just fabric, instead of I've got to set up a separate service and then add credentials and get access methods, and then I'm going to use Data Factory and I've got to set up all these linked services. I've got to do these. Now, do you still have to do a lot of that? Yeah, but it's all in the same interface, so it's less, I think, jumpy, right?
I'm going through an engagement right now. We're walking through in detail how to build data from source system and move it all the way through to reports. And so we're working with a team that understands, like, they've been through like fabric in a day, the high level, and they're like, okay, this is good, but like, what do I need to do? Where are the gotchas in this system? Because if you haven't, to your point, Seth, like if you haven't gone through the build the ADF, build the patterns outside of Power BI, you don't know to bring those patterns into Power BI. And so there's a, for example, you have a data source of Salesforce. Well, how do you organize that content against your internal data sources? Do you have a separate lakehouse? Do you put it all in one lakehouse? Where does the naming live? Does the naming live at tables? Does it live on the lakehouses? So there's all these, I think, considerations. And I think the community is starting to get their head around, okay, what does this infrastructure look like? And it's going to probably adjust and adapt as the tool change. Like metric sets could present another workspace we need to hold on to. So we have like 2 workspaces now, semantic models and reports. We may want to add a third workspace for all of your data sets, pipelines, lake houses, things like that. You may want to add a fourth for metric sets. Maybe that's something you want to share differently. So it now starts talking about, okay, what do we want to do it? But the possibilities are kind of endless. You can kind of do whatever you want, which is a good thing, and it's also a double-edged sword.
I think that's go ahead.
No, so random question. You're gonna build a fabric team, a BI team. What do you need first?
Ooh, it's a great question. I'm going to say you start with at least some data engineering people, because without that, you don't get this. It's like building a bridge from both sides. You have to start with some data to get yourself going, but you also need the business person to talk to the business, build models, that other side as well. So I mean, if you could get the one person that could do the data engineering and could bring in, the other element here, that would be great. But if not, there's some. So ideally, you'd have one person that could do both.
Okay.
From a fabric perspective,
right now.
Yeah,
one person.
I know. All right. Well, if it's one person, I'm probably starting with the data engineering side of things, because I think you have to get some of the data into the fabric ecosystem first, and then we can so if you know how to data engineer, you may not be building the best stacks or the most pretty reports, but at least you can get the data in and you can structure it in a way that gets answers out to the business, at least initially. See, and I think over time you hire more people that are more focused on models and front end side of things.
So I think I'm leaning a little on the other end, where I'm having these what can you get away with scenarios with fabric right now.
Jeez.
And but the reason I say that is I think we've said this a lot. Like, yes, there's a lot of principles of data engineering, data science, data factory, and Power BI and data modeling that all goes into fabric. But we've also established too, this is a very ever-changing sphere where it's not a copy and paste necessarily with the scenarios and the methods. Some of them will apply, but they're not going to apply, copy and paste completely. So for me, I think there's still a lot of applications, a lot of the tooling in Fabric where I can take a Power BI developer or someone who's been heavy already in data modeling, understands those principles, and capture them with, hey, there's data flows Gen 2. There's data pipelines, which is not necessarily, the biggest jump compared to like learn Jupyter notebooks now if you've never learned Python. So there's 2 out of the 3 ways to do data engineering we can start with. Now, do they need to have full principles of the medallion approach? Again, this goes into them. What can you get away with scenarios? If we need a lake house or we need a staging lake house and just where our production data is, that's actually a good way to start. Again, I don't, in my head right now, with the way Fabric's going, it's not necessarily going to be everything we've done in the previous Azure services that we're doing exactly in Fabric. So let's at least get us started where I don't have to necessarily hire the data engineer. No, because it's not an exact copy and paste of the same skill sets. There's a lot of skills that overlap, but it may not be the same exact person because I think things are much more integrated. So if I want to get quicker adoption, if I want to get quicker into Fabric, I'm going to look at my data engineer or my data modelers who are more on the developer side. They understand the purpose and not just the skill of data flows, the purpose of a gold semantic model. And I think we can now bring them a step back to understanding what a lakehouse is and the purposes of that. We don't have to do the full implementation.
So you said a lot of things in there. I had to bite my tongue on.
I saw. I noticed.
Fabric isn't this brand new ecosystem of things that don't exist. It is the tool sets brought together. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that they're not going to be enhanced or offer up new features or offer simplicity? No, of course not. I would imagine that's the direction in many cases. But to assume that we're in this fantastical new world that didn't exist before, I think is wrong. Just not flat out.
I agree.
That's the way Tommy's talking. Seth interprets this fantasy world.
Okay, sure.
So rather than like diving into all the other areas I don't agree with, what I'm hearing you say is your first person is the modeler and front end person more so.
I would say it's closer. If you were to consider Power BI the realm of just Power BI, it's a Power BI developer who's focusing on semantic models.
Power BI developer. Now, where does that power? Is it important where that Power BI developer comes from?
Finance. Always finance.
I know that's the default answer.
Do you know? Like,
yeah.
More technology side, more business side.
I would probably lean towards more of the technology side, but again, I don't think that to me is not as permanent as understanding. To my point, to reiterate, understanding that they're already building the purpose of a semantic model or data flows. That's kind of been their focus because they understand it's for the users or for other people to build. That they understand that we're not just building a report, but I'm building something that can be replicated.
Yeah,
I want that methodology or that mindset.
Okay, so
I'm struggling here a little bit on this part.
I'm super glad that both of you chose something different.
Well, you've got to choose one now, Seth. Like, so what are you choosing?
I do.
Data scientist.
I do. Okay, so this is the first person, right?
First person you're hiring.
You're hiring on. I think it's a BI developer with a data engineering background. So that's where I'm cheating to some degree.
You are cheating,
right?
But that's okay.
Well, but I am and I'm not, right? Like I would pick me. Right? So, but think about this, right? Like data engineer, obviously background, DBA, somebody in technical spaces that understand structures of data, and or now in realms of probably albeit harder to find would be somebody who understands like big data.
Sure.
Because those structures are slightly different, not slightly, vastly different, but also having an understanding of how to develop something that the business can digest. There's two parts here. One is that person I think is for both of the reasons you guys stated. Tommy, I disagree that we can go very front end, because with the Fabric ecosystem, if we're talking about a business intelligence team in Fabric, you have to have somebody who understands these structures to some degree on the back end in order to develop a solution that's going to scale, as opposed to just the solution I'm building just for this report. Mm-hmm. And to Mike's point, right? If it's just a data engineer, Tommy, I think you have a relevant argument from the standpoint that, well, we're going to hit a blocker where we're kind of delivering what the business needs, but the business isn't going to understand the value behind everything, because it's not presented in such a way that can bring insights, or, to the extent that somebody who understands the modeling, the visualization, et cetera, can do. So I think it is pivotal that organizations try to find the expert that is going to lead these efforts, that has the full spectrum, that is truly a technology person that understands the development from the end to end, and just chooses one area or another because they like it better. Either I love building pipelines and doing data analysis and finding data problems, or I'm on the front where I love interacting with the business, and I love solving, the business problems and bringing them insights with data. And as a byproduct of that, I build models that extend and visualization. So I'm probably cheating the most here between everybody. And for the audience, no, we didn't plan this, right? I picked the back end, I picked the front end. Seth tries to cheat and pick everything.
But at the same time, I think you make a good point where you can't say, if you're going to draft someone into the NFL draft, well, I want someone who throws like Patrick Mahomes, tackles like Ray Lewis. Is like that person, I don't want to say doesn't exist, but we have to understand too, even in our space with Power BI, we know that type of person that ideal for us is limited. There's limited resources for, even in just the Power BI world, who can do it all. And now we're actually asking to expand that.
Well, I mean, this is kind of what I started with my phrase here. Was like it's this build a bridge from both sides, right? Yeah. You can't get to a report without having data, and you can't get to data without understanding what the report should do. So you're kind of need to meet middle way there. I would say your first hire should be very well versed in, if you can, both data engineering and Power BI. So to your point, Seth, if your first hire should be strong, regardless. Doesn't really matter. You want someone who's had some runtime in big data stuff, Delta tables, understands Parquet, because I've seen it happen where people don't quite understand the technology enough. And this is where I think some of these, the DP 600 tests don't really do us a good service of really testing knowledge of people, because I haven't taken the test yet, so I can't speak 100% to what the questions are on the test. But from what I've heard from people, is it's a good test of knowledge, of general knowledge around there's some very specific things. There's a lot of different touching points across the entire Fabric ecosystem, but it's not telling you what is the optimize activity doing? What is the structure of a Delta table? How do I keep costs down? Where do I look for information around capacity reporting and find that, compare it to storage costs? Right. Mm-hmm. So to me, there's some really real world technical pieces that I want my person to understand. So I want someone to be able to speak to those and have some experience around that. And then again, if you're talking about your first hire, they're the ones administering the admin portal. They're the ones probably building your workspaces. They're the ones planning, which teams get Power BI, and do we roll it out all at once? Do we take a business-led approach, or are we an IT-led approach, right? So that first person, I think, is very important to have a lot of skills on them. And what I think I find a lot in organizations is they already have someone who's doing Power BI. Where we need more skills is we need that expert in Power BI to kind of a little bit more educate on the data engineering side. And, as this thing grows, there's definitely going to need to be some kind of story around, okay, well, we now have the core of what we're trying to produce, kind of working. Where do we plug in a data scientist now? Do you go use semantic link to go grab things out of models and figure out how that works? So there's going to be, I think, additional roles in here as well that are going to potentially pop up. And you're going to be able to need to have these teams to work together. So your first hire, regardless, I think to your point, Seth, needs to be strong. They've got to understand DBA, they got to understand Delta, they got to be able to understand models and reporting, and that's a hard person to find.
Yeah, I would say a way to get around that is to hire 2 people, not 1. Like if you're all in on Fabric, or it is a starting point, right? Well, but Mike, what to your point, like if you're on a business side and you already have somebody in Power BI, a perfect kind of way to implement or dive into Fabric would be, okay, you hire the data engineer. Correct. And you pull that Power BI person into
a federated model. Yeah, right? And this is what's talked about in the adoption roadmap. This is the federated approach.
These two key roles work together towards what Adrian in the chat kind of points out, which is all of this should be business driven based on the objectives that the organization needs. And we both know, or all of us know, and including our audience, right? Power BI offers us that quick win. So you need that. You need to keep continually delivering things for the business to engage their interest, their solving their problems, etc. And you need the data engineer on the back end to build the go forward strategy depending on what the business needs are going to be, because they're ever increasing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where that key part of data engineer comes in, where, okay, great, there's this new ecosystem. We're going to consolidate everything around this. Here's the strategy by which we're going to execute. And by separating out those 2 things, you can definitely not look for the purple unicorn kind of out there from a hiring perspective. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, those 2 roles, I think, get to play very closely together now, much more so than they did in the past with all of these other services. Like, we're in different environments completely, and I'm just handing you data. No, now we're all in the same place. Hey, I need you to create this object, move that forward, share it over to this workspace, or I'm developing this, and it's a much tighter knit back and forth. I think that will accelerate a lot of the projects, but ultimately it's about being able to support both of those things in order to accelerate what you need to from a deliverables perspective. Because if you choose one or the other, each one of those roles is going to hit a block in Fabric, right? Or any ecosystem, which is like, oh, well, now I'm a data engineer. I've done the whole pipeline. Now I'm in Power BI. How do I build a visual, right? How do I create this thing? And the same thing for the business person, or somebody who knows Power BI well. Everything's done in Power Query. Alex would love that just continues, but I want to branch out in what is this lake house? What is a data warehouse? What does that mean? Right. And then you've got to do a lot of ramp up in learning, and all those things are slowdowns for the business. So opportunities to learn, absolutely. But you're setting things up in an optimal way. And then depending on how the team builds and grows, then you have a lot of different choices. And I think we delve into other aspects of what's important, when building a team.
I love what you just said, because that's 2 things I was going to mention. I'm asking myself through this conversation 2 fundamental questions about who I'm hiring. Number 1, what is the final destination right now for the workflow in Fabric? If you looked at building the lake house, what the UI gives you, it's a semantic model. Right now, that final destination is really building a semantic model. So that's really should be the core focus according to the current workflow. And then the second question I'm asking myself is how much allotted time do I have for ramp up? If whichever person I'm bringing in, whichever background they're coming from, I think we've already established, or we're all agreeing, that person's going to have some overlap in the other skill set. So how much time am I giving that person to learn X, Y, and Z, and to be familiar and much more importantly, comfortable with it? But my really fundamental question here, as I'm going through this, is what is the final destination for a lake house or for the deliverable in Fabric right now?
Say the question again.
What is the final destination for a deliverable in Fabric? What's the final solution? Based on the UI in Fabric, I'm calling it the semantic model. Everything leads up to building a semantic model right now.
I mean, I think that's your story today. I'm not sure if that's your story forever, right? So, I mean, again, I'm talking with other MVPs right now about, hey, we can use semantic link to go pull out some data from a model, and we can go run some machine learning on top of it somewhere else, or do so there's other opportunities to start pulling this data out and leverage it other places. I don't know. So yes, I think for now, I think the semantic model makes the most sense, but it feels like there's this concept of, if you read some of the Kimball documentation or where theology on like how to build warehouses and stuff. I mean, Donald's talking about this in the chat right now, which I think is really good. Building the warehouse is conform dimensions and facts to what you want to be calculating. So it really does make you take a concerted effort of like, what are we really measuring? What are our main KPIs that we care about? But if you think about the semantic model can sometimes be little tiny smaller versions of like what the actual data warehouse is doing. And so when you look at architectures of what you're building, you have potentially a larger warehouse where all the things live with all the the dimensions, all the facts that you want, and kind of a larger pool. And then you have potentially these semantic models that might be just carving pieces of that off for specific business functions. So again, I think it gives you an ultimate amount of flexibility to be able to design what you need. To go back to what we're trying to get to is, right, business can't make decisions without numbers. They need some numbers. They got to trust their data. So that's where we land.
Yeah, I don't understand the question or the statement. You're saying, what is the end goal of Fabric?
What is the primary deliverable right now, according to the UI in Fabric? And to me, all roads lead to building a semantic model. When I build a warehouse or when I build a lake house, it's like, hey, your next step is build a semantic model.
So
I'm struggling with the point of saying, like, what's the end deliverable? I mean, the end deliverable is insights and KPIs for the business to make decisions.
Business value.
It's business value. So, like, whether that's an Excel sheet, whether that's a pagina report,
that's
whether
gray,
that's
yeah. And I'm saying
it's from the gray. It's gray.
Yeah, because I'm saying the actual technological deliverable, because I can build a.
There is no technology deliverable. The business doesn't care. Tommy, the business doesn't care that you're building the Taj Mahal in Fabric, and you call it a semantic what? They don't care. They don't like I do want to lean into this.
Okay.
Right? In a less non-aggressive tone.
Oh no, I like the aggressive building.
Otherwise, Mike Carlo is going to drop in a joke here to ease the mood.
All right, I got some Chat GPT. We'll go hit up some jokes here pretty soon because that's getting a little.
I think this is good. This is good.
No, my point being, I agree with Mike 100%. Oh, the only reason they're spending money on business intelligence is because we can produce insights that the business does not have. The value to the business is in the deliverable itself and what actions they can take on it. The only reason they're investing anything is because we're producing efficiencies or revenue generating ideas or things that help them make decisions better and faster. That's the end goal. It has nothing to, they could care less if you built an individual model for every single report, as long as it was fast. If you could do it the same way every single time, instead of going, now it's going to take us a month. The reason we build this infrastructure behind the scene is so that we can produce faster results to the business. It has nothing to do with the end goal being a semantic model.
And the reason why I'm hesitating here a bit, Tommy, on your point around, I think the semantic model is a very pivotal piece of Fabric. It's very used. It's very common. It's a piece of technology that accelerates or speeds up this ability to get from things I want to know about data into actually getting answers about the information, right? It's great at aggregating. It's great at filtering. But as I think about Fabric now and the possibilities of doing other things with it, like I can build shortcuts to my warehouse and give those shortcuts to other teams in other workspaces. So, I mean, I think to your point, Tommy, like semantic model, when you look at Power BI, has been a very pivotal element of it. What we get now is a lot more flexibility to give people other aspects. Like, for example, go to this SQL Analytics endpoint. You could go in there and just say, hey, write SQL against tables that are in the lakehouse. That may be what some teams need. I don't know. But the fact that we have the ability to do this, and I think to me, the aha moment in a lot of this is the friction to do that, the friction to get users in to use SQL endpoints, semantic models, Power BI report has been greatly reduced. And we're now at a place where, oh, you need access? Let me type in your name. Now you have access to the workspace. Or let me create you a new workspace and I'll just send some data to you. The ease of doing that in Azure with all the permissions and everything else was much more difficult previously. This is a way faster speed. I'm not worried about network security. It's all built into it's built into the ecosystem. It's that kind of stuff that I'm like, man, this is really helpful. And that I think is what's adding a lot of value to the business.
And I'll give the reply that's maybe less hot take-ish. And number one, the semantic model to me with Power BI, again, I feel that it's being elevated in terms of where it lies in terms of a data solution. It's no longer the end goal semantic model report, semantic link. I think what else they're doing with semantic model being able to be in the service. The semantic link is getting elevated in terms of the use cases for it. It's no longer just for a report. The other point, Mike, you're helping build shortcuts. We're building lake houses. Why? Well, at the end, you're really helping, you're helping those other teams probably build a semantic model. You're not just giving them a shortcut for the sake of a shortcut. You're helping them.
Or it's a shortcut so they can just access it in the SQL Analytics endpoint. I mean, it doesn't have to be and it's my point is like, yes, probably again, semantic model is probably the most commonly used element because it's caching data. It's super fast. It gives you answers quickly. Great. But that may not be the final destination for a lot of your things. And now that we're adding data engineers and potentially even data scientists to this workload, data scientists probably won't use semantic models other than to get data out or export it. But they're going to be using they're going to be in notebooks. They're going to be looking at lakes. They're going to be getting a bunch of tables. So, I mean, there's a lot of other new workloads I think we're experiencing here that is going to change the reliance on solely just the semantic model. I'm not saying it's a bad technology or we're going to move away from it, but it's now there's the yes and a whole bunch of other things too.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of yes and, while Tommy was talking or during this dialogue, there a thought that struck me based on some recent work we've been doing that I wonder whether or not Fabric is going to open the doors more on is the business or opportunities to engage the business in looking just for data efficiencies. And what I mean by that, if you think about, like, especially in systems where data is harder to get, right? Because it is unstructured, it's in Lake, it's, et cetera. There are so many, like one of the biggest things we did even in consulting together, Mike, where like you walk in with Power BI and it's like, guys, you're doing this like super manual Excel process, right? Like Power BI can solve this for you.
Yeah.
In that same vein though, there are those use cases, but many where you have all of these third-party systems in organizations where sometimes business users just need, listen, I'm generating this report from here, I'm generating this one from here, I'm loading into Excel, I'm doing all these processes, and then I still need to analyze the granular data output, right? Could there be value of sucking it into business intelligence? Sure, but that's not their need. I almost wonder if Fabric now opens that door to have like an easier workflow for engaging with business and saying, hey, let's build an automated pipe for you on this, and we'll connect to these things, we'll do the transformations, we'll knock out all of that stuff that takes you a really long time, and we'll put this CSV file in this location for you on a weekly basis or something.
I mean, I think this is a real solid use case. I think to your point there, Seth, right? There's going to be some experts or people that are hired. And again, I think there's going to be a continued shift here in the business side. I think the business is going to hire some more technical people, or they're going to find more people that are both business facing and technical in nature, because I think there's a lot of value here. So, a lot of times when I think people export or need to see all the data, there's a trust issue with the data. The reason people are asking for the very fine grained detail, either you need an answer around a very specific thing, or you can't trust the roll up of numbers to a certain level. And so I think a lot of times what we get ourselves stuck into is like, this is potentially a trust increaser, where I give them access to more of the raw information and teach them, hey, here's a lake house, here's a SQL Analytics endpoint, go here, and then here's how you write some basic SQL to get some data together. They can start picking at the information and learning what it is. But in your comment of this, Seth, it makes me really feel like you need to be at least a concerted effort to figure out who will own what things. And when you give the business time to experiment with stuff, which I think we for sure should do, what is the mechanism, the pattern, the whatever the process is to say, okay, you've had time to play with this stuff, business. You've added some value to it. You even have a report maybe you built. What do we do? Do you need to retain ownership of this, or do you need to pull it back into central? Does it come back into a main process that the central business intelligence team will own? Or do we just leave it alone and let the business continue to manage that space? So this is where I think a lot of the process pieces is going to kind of push around a little bit around, more conversation should be held around, we'll let you run wild, but you own it. Like, our hands are not tied. If it's bad data, you can come back to us. If it's not bad data and you're shaping it and doing weird things with it and you're reporting to a VP based on the output of that you've changed it, you don't come back and blame us. So it's this, how do I say this? By bringing more people together and having more access to data, there's going to need to be more conversations around who's the stewards of the data. And I don't think a lot of companies have a super strong culture around data stewardship. And this is accelerating that conversation.
I agree with you, and I would almost pose the question: do you think Fabric is going to cause more friction in organizations?
Initially, yes, but it should get better over time, I would think, right?
Hopefully, the precipitous of that question is, you already have organizations that like have different departments that are like, yep, we're going to be data driven, we're going to solve these problems for the business, and like finance, great example, right? Like, they're definitely broaching into business intelligence experts on their team to solve
their lane
problems in finance, right? So, taking that a step further, now I have Fabric. Now I can build my own ecosystem. Like, we now own Fabric and all of the things. Are they going to stay just in finance, or is that going to branch into, now there's a central BI team and they're trying to do something in Fabric, and then there's the marketing team and they're building things in Fabric because nobody's talking to each other, right? Like, now all of a sudden, what do you do with 3 different departments that all have big Fabric ecosystems? Like,
I think,
you're just supporting that continually as an organization, or what are you doing with those resources? Are they 100% dedicated? Because the reason I ask that question is, like, being a central BI guy, right, with a central data team, I already know that a central BI team is a support team to some degree. But not every single one of these departments needs 100% dedicated time all the time.
Exactly right.
Right. So like, to get the most like value for dollar, like, in my mind, it makes a ton of sense that isn't just dedicated to a singular area. You would have those resources plugging around and doing things for other parts of the organization that also need assistance. So that's why I'm kind of poking that question to see, what you guys think.
Well, and I don't know if I'm going to contradict myself, but I think, as I consider what you're saying, it's the expansion of the BI team services. 3 of the major projects I worked on as a BI team probably should have been in a lakehouse rather than in a semantic model. The way we were pushing data together and integrating data together, mashing data together, we didn't have that ability at the time, but it was going through CSV files and mergings and appendings and multiple data flows. But it would have made more sense for the business to be in a data engineering role and like stored data in a lakehouse. And I think that's, for me, to answer your question, this is really talking about, if I'm looking at the BI team, this is just expanding their roles rather than help me build a report, help me build a model that we can build reports off of. To your point, I think it's, we have this data, can we store it in, we just want it stored somewhere locally, or we want it stored historically, whether that's in a simple lake house or that's their own environment that they can play in. that goes perfectly into the idea of, okay, we're going to put this data together in a lakehouse. You can query it. You can look at it anytime. It's not only report level view. It's, you can look at the raw data. Now you own it. Now you own it until it gets to the report. So whether or not that's friction or not, to me, it's the same thing when we build that first report for a team and they go, that's not right. You're like, that's your data. And
I've had a number of conversations where we show up and we build some reports or some models and people are like, I didn't expect it to be like that. Well, we've never really actually had a full view of data without people trying to put their hands in the pie and like massage this number and massage that number and clean this over here. Like that's the way the data comes in. So, I mean, I was talking with somebody else and there is years of data engineering that has been occurring in places and organizations. And again, I'm going to go back to finance. Saw a store procedure recently, had well over 3,000 lines of code, drop, replace tables all over the place. Really interesting stuff. But this was like a 5-6 year development plan of like figuring out what works and cleaning some data. There's a whole bunch of where clauses in here. Well, where clauses means I'm cleaning data. I'm picking up data fields in the column and cleaning stuff. Great. You have all this rich business logic. And then expect someone to come in from the Fabric team or the Power BI team and be like, hey, rebuild this entire store procedure in a week. Like, I'm going to need a little bit more time to figure out what's going on here. But the idea here is like, these things are already happening, right? There's data engineering occurring likely somewhere in your business and people are picking up and figuring out how to get this stuff done because they got to deliver results. They got to report out and make things happen. What I'm saying now is you now potentially have a tool where you don't have to do things in a vacuum or a silo. And this is where we start talking about, okay, who really should own things? What does the stewardship look like? And Jack, you're spot on. You're talking about this. This is where the center of excellence steps in and says, hey, look, we, as a company, we need to decide data is valuable. It's an asset. How are we going to get teams to play well with that data space?
And I agree with that. When and if you have that, and my perspective and comment around that Fabric ecosystem is many organizations don't have that yet.
True.
Right.
That's true.
And I agree with Christian. Like Fabric is not self-service business intelligence. That's Power BI, and that's where that belongs. Fabric opens up this whole other ecosystem that Mike, I think, drives directly into the conversation that an organization needs to have. Otherwise, you may have factions within, your organization that are building their own solutions, and that's not going to, in the end, solve your business intelligence needs, right? It's the same conversation we've been having, right? And maybe we need to like have an episode where we just talk about that nugget of how do you transition from nothing to Fabric to bringing people and organizational units together, because you're right, Mike. How are they solving that today? Probably in third-party systems. The vast majority of the time, it's in a separate area. So is it a great opportunity for you to like consolidate all of your information into these areas that potentially can be shared with one another? Absolutely, right? But it requires those teams to work together, at least somebody to give them the vision that, hey, there's a real value here in that we don't need all of our stuff in these third-party systems. You guys can actually still secure your area, but those pivotal things that you guys always have problems with sharing numbers, like here's how easy it is to share in this ecosystem. And that's where I think Fabric does take off. It's just how do you get organizations to see that path and or get to the point where you're pushing data strategy into the conversation because it is really valuable.
And I think this is just, to me, making me think about who am I hiring or who am I looking for. So, I mean, but like all the things we're talking about, I'm leaning back on my own experience. I'm looking for the central BI guy who's frustrated, or person who's frustrated at their role because they're probably already doing a lot of data engineering, but they don't know it, or their solutions are asking for it, but they don't have that capability. Like I said, from user groups and again, especially my own experience, had I had this technology available to me at my role or company, this would have made things a ton easier, but it was still the same idea. We have this raw data. we have to clean it, then eventually build a report. So
I have never gone to any operational system and had any data come out ready in a shape that Power BI, any reporting loves. Even if you go to the source system and pull out data and say, I'm going to pull it in and do it in Excel, you're always doing something to shape the data. It's always going to happen because it's your row level detailing, and now you're like aggregating in column information. Like it's a different structure, so it's going to need some level of touching that.
Yeah. And a bit of exaggeration, but if I'm hiring or interviewing, it's like, did you have a data engineering team? Nope. Great. Then you're my person, basically, because they had to think in this mindset, and they already understand Power BI. I think obviously they need a ramp up, and I think I do not want to downplay Mike and Seth, what you're both saying. You have to have someone, whether or not they learn it, or there's their ramp up time, that is going to know that more than just the fundamentals of a medallion approach and the data engineering background. I don't think that's something that can't be learned from someone who's been in the back end of Power BI for a long time now.
All right. Well, we're about 51 minutes into this episode, and I would like to ask this next question. So who's your second hire? No, I'm just teasing, because that would be like another hour-long conversation as well. That we've hired our first person. But this conversation, I think, is coming up very relevant. And the only other thought I have that goes along with this, when Tommy and Seth, I think you make very valid points here. I have one other thought that does kind of trigger some mindset here. When you think about companies, how they structure their company dictates a lot of how well we are able to communicate across departments. So I've been in some organizations where there's very distinct silos of product, and that team has its own profit and loss, its P&L for that particular thing. Or you're in a company that have been acquiring other companies, right? And when you acquire companies, you typically get other data systems. Someone has to make the decision to say, look, are we going to centralize all these systems to one system? Or are we going to let these other business units run themselves kind of independently for a period of time? And I think how you structure your company directly impacts, will a center of excellence actually be effective? Because you now have made potentially multiple silos in your business because of the pay structure or what they're allowed to buy or not allowed to buy. Business unit 1 says, hey, I'm going to go buy Salesforce. Business unit 2 says, no, I'm using Dynamics. Who can override that decision and kind of make sure that we're having the same decision around what makes the most sense for the business? I don't really care what you pick. Just pick one, or try and figure out how to merge them down to one. So I do think there is some level of like corporate oversight and structure that does play a factor in here as well. It either encourages communication between departments, or it potentially increases the siloing effect.
Yeah. I think, final thoughts for me, essentially, business intelligence exists because it creates business value, ultimately. Fabric is just a new method for us to solve a ton of technical problems that we've had in the back end with all of these services in different areas, and it helps us streamline how we go and build those. So these new methods still need to include quick wins, while some of these data organizational processes and storage to maximize benefits in the future all get baked out. This is one of those key areas where organizations should lean in and understand how they can leverage this new ecosystem and have the organization aligned to those for long-term goals to really maximize the benefit. Because this is a unique platform that I'm not aware of any other competitor to bring all of these tools and services together in the manner that they have. And it doesn't remove any of the same self-service abilities and value that Power BI offers. It just enhances and opens the doors for organizations to be much more, I think, cost efficient, as well as create data ecosystems that they can leverage and share with each other in a much more meaningful and faster way.
Yeah. And I think, as I've considered the question, rather than the first hire, there's two diverging roads on how you structure the team. Am I solving for Fabric now in this current state, or am I solving for Fabric or what I think it will be? I think those are very two fundamental ways of how we're going to build this team, and how we look forward to not just the one person, but the group of people that are going to be part of this.
Yeah, I said it at first when Microsoft originally announced Fabric out at Build last year, It's been here about a year.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy. So I was very excited about it because a lot of technologies I was using and building with at the time was being incorporated into Power BI. And I think Microsoft is very good at thinking that way. I definitely felt there was a lot of rough edges, but I definitely think because of their concerted effort to continue refining and perfecting and this whole encompassing solution of ease of use platform, multiple tools that do exactly what you want, or have capabilities, data engineering, data science, business intelligence pieces. Like there is a wealth of really smart people trying to figure this out and make this easier for businesses to use. And so for that, I'm very excited about where things are going. And I'm seeing a lot of improvement since it came out. Things are much easier to use. I'm much happier using Spark and notebooks now than I was when it first came out. So major improvements in that area. But Microsoft was new to that space. They didn't have kind of the architecture yet figured out. And so if one thing Microsoft's really good at, it's Microsoft is good. They're not first to market for anything, really. They're kind of like slower to market because they're big. But when they come in with great UI, really cost-effective solutions. I think they deliver a lot of value for the spend of the money. So I'm very excited to see where this is going to continue to go. We'll hopefully have some more key thoughts and things that we will do for Thursday's call, because we'll actually have had some runtime and some announcements out of build and see where they put their money. What things in Fabric are we going to be getting here that's going to make this even easier, or what new features we're going to be looking for. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the next phase of development looks like inside Fabric. Tommy, what is your final thoughts?
That was my final thoughts before you talked.
All right, good.
Two roads.
I can't wait, Mike, for all of your short hot takes and all these videos that are going to come directly out of the Learning Center. Either way, Thursday should be a fun call.
Don't talk me up too much. We'll see how well I do.
I just want to know how many of our previous episodes are going to be irrelevant now. Well, we're going to.
We're just going to co-pilot everything. You don't do anything. It's co-pilot everything. We'll just let co-pilot handle it all. So we'll see what happens. Anyways, with that, thank you all very much. I really appreciate your time and your listenership. Hopefully audio was good and the video is still okay today. We appreciate your time, and we would love it if you would share this podcast with somebody else. We spend a lot of time thinking about these topics. We do this every day. Hopefully there's some nuggets of wisdom here that you found from our experiences in working in this space. If you found that, let somebody else know you enjoy the content as well, and share it with somebody else. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Maybe it has to do with today. Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast and leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Excellent. And we'll see you next time.